Hey, friend, welcome to She Said podcast. I'm your host, Laura Cox Kaplan, and I'm really happy to have you with me today. So, here we are. It's late January. And if you're anything like me or like most people, those goals that you set at the beginning of the month may have started to just be a little bit tougher to stick with. You've reached maybe that middle part and the news worn off, and you're right in the middle of slogging through, and it can be very, very hard to stay motivated. Now, if you've been with me over the course of this month listening to this podcast, you already know that we have been building what I would refer to as an intentional runway into goal setting, because most of us don't need more pressure. What we need oftentimes is better alignment. Now, in episode 349, our first for this year, we started with the thing that we usually skip, which is what to do before you set a single goal, essentially the scaffolding that's ultimately going to support your goal setting. We talk about the importance of looking back on the year that's passed to think about what worked and what didn't, what you learned and what surprised you, and to really encourage you to give an honest assessment so that you have a clearer foundation in order to jump right into the goals that you want to set. We talked about, as part of that, the importance of picking a word of the year, which can serve as your North Star. And that can be especially helpful, again, as I said, during the mid-month when maybe your enthusiasm for that goal has started to wane. Then in episode 350, we talked about what happens when you do set goals and then reality hits. And sometimes we can turn a setback or a failure or a slip into an evaluation of who we are. We talked about some important ways to avoid that. And then last week in episode 351, we talked about a question that I got recently, and it reminded me of something that I wanted to share on this podcast. Essentially, when someone asks you, what is the end game with a project that you're working on that maybe doesn't necessarily adhere to the same kinds of measurements and benchmarks of, other projects that you would work on. My podcast is a perfect example of that. And that question can sometimes cause us to start to ask, well, wait a minute, is the person asking because I'm not where I should be? And it can cause some second guessing in yourself. And so I talk a little bit about ways to not internalize that question, some of the things that you can do instead. And that provides a really great bridge for today's conversation, because staying motivated isn't necessarily about trying harder or being more disciplined. Oftentimes, it's understanding how motivation actually works so that you can build goals and feedback loops and really an environment that supports you when you get into the messy middle and when your willpower might begin to run a bit low. Now, you'll find links to all of those past episodes that I just mentioned wherever you listen to podcasts or in the show notes for this episode. This episode is episode 352. And all of this is why I am especially excited to welcome this week's guest. She provides a natural continuation of this January series. Her name is Ayelet Fishbach. She is a professor of behavioral science at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She is one of the world's leading experts and researchers on motivation and goal pursuit. She's received numerous awards for her research, but I think what especially sets her work apart is how practical it is, which you're going to hear in this conversation. Now, in her book, which I have here, it's called Get It Done. She provides language and honestly a lot of relief to what so many of us are navigating. How to choose the right goals, how to stay engaged when progress can feel really slow or maybe even invisible, and how to reframe struggle not as failure but as information. This conversation is about continuing to move forward, not perfectly, but intentionally and one small step at a time, and really learning how to keep going when it might feel like it's easier to just stop. So I'm excited for you to hear this conversation with Ayelet Fishbach. Enjoy. Professor Ayelet Fishbach, welcome to She Said, She Said.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here. I have been doing a series of sort of goal setting conversations on this podcast during the month of January. And one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on today is that we're at that point in January. A lot of people, myself included, have set some big ambitious goals for the year. You start off with that new year energy. And by the time you get to this point in January, we're now in what is today, the 22nd, 23rd, the new has worn off a little bit. This is your area of expertise. So before we jump into the substance of that, I would love for you to maybe talk a little bit about what attracted you to this field. What was it about motivation that kind of got you going?
Well, everyone that's already listening to this podcast is probably curious about motivation. So I don't need to preach to the choir to say that this is a super interesting topic. But now I'm a behavioral scientist. I'm a social psychologist by my training. And I was curious about motivation. The field of social psychology looks at how your environment influences your behavior, how you can change what you do and what you achieve by changing something about the way you do things, okay, or the way you think about the environment. And what a better area to test these interventions than in getting people to achieve their health and professional and family goals and so on. So I
Yeah.
study motivation.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe let's start kind of from the very beginning of this topic related to sort of the scientific reasons behind why our motivation starts to fade. Once we've sort of passed the bright, shiny start and we're a long way from the finish line, talk about what happens to us psychologically. Why do we oftentimes fall into that pattern of the middle? This is hard to slog through.
Well, it's easier to start and to finish than to pull yourself through the longer middle. At the beginning, every action feels like it does a lot. Okay, I just doubled my progress. Okay, I went to the gym once and now I went twice, and it's double of this.
Right.
Okay, toward the end, the motivation is very high. By the way, also for animals, okay? Yeah, and animals running the maze, okay? Rats, as they get closer to the cheese, they run faster. As we get closer to finish academic degree, toward no, finish writing a book, well, we are highly motivated. We can see the end in sight. Every action feels like it does a lot.
Mhm.
Okay, in the middle, it doesn't feel like you are moving the needle, or the contribution is meaningful, and so middles are difficult. And when we set a goal for the year, we're going to have a long middle.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the strategies, and there are many, many strategies. The book talks about all of these in a really practical way, which I love. But let's jump into some of the strategies and maybe the things that people either underestimate or just discount altogether in terms of their impact on keeping you going and especially helping you through that middle phase.
Yeah. So let me start with what people overestimate. And what people overestimate is their willpower.
Mm.
Motivation strategies are all about finding the easy way instead of trying harder.
Mm. Mhm, mhm.
It's not beating yourself. It's not saying, I just need to be stronger, or I need to have a strong willpower. It's about designing a system that allows you to do this in the easy way. Now, in terms of what are the strategies, well, they usually fall into setting goals, monitoring progress toward these goals, managing your goal system and like all the other goals that are in your life, and then designing social support. That is, if you set a goal that is exciting for you, okay, if you can measure progress. If you know to like look back initially and then look forward once you like beyond the midpoint, if this goal fits with everything else and your friends, colleagues, family is supportive, you have a pretty good chance of sticking with it. Otherwise, it's harder.
Yeah. You talk about the fact that not all types of feedback and I mean, I guess it could be considered support, but not all feedback is created equal. And so when you talk about designing this environment and your support system and sort of what that looks like, you talk there's a number of areas that you recommend being aware of. Let's walk through some of those because I've always heard and certainly benefited from having an accountability partner if you're, trying to get more exercise, having somebody to go on a walk with, or if you're, dieting, having the people who live in your house also on the diet with you is really important. So let's talk a little bit about designing those structures and that sort of accountability feedback piece.
So we are social animals. As people, we live with other people and we do things with other people. And this is in our brain. Okay. There is
Mm,
nothing we can do about it. We were not designed to do things by ourselves. And so if your goals are with people or if other people are aware of them, okay, and you mentioned healthy eating. So if
mhm.
your goal is to eat healthy with your entire family, or if your family is supportive of your desire to change what you eat, you have a much better chance. Keep in mind that social support means really support. Okay. So, when we are supported, we thrive. But when we feel like someone is trying to control us, we don't like it. We rebel.
Right.
Right? And so I'm not talking about people who criticize us, who put us down, but more of being our cheerleaders. We look at studies in which we look at who is the best role model. The best role model is someone who wants you to be successful. That is, looking at some amazing athletes on TV is actually not going to do much to inspire you to exercise. But having someone, which could be your coach, okay, or your friend, your family member that wants you to keep up with your exercising schedule, this will move the needle.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Talk about the aspects that are kind of counterproductive to that because, if you're whether it's, someone motivating you or whether you're trying to motivate your team or your children, for example, or maybe a spouse, like talk about how the right calibration for what that looks like, sort of what that level of support is. Because I think I read in the book something about how it's not just about the positive. It's getting that balance right so that it's feedback. It's not just cheerleading, but it's also not negative either. So maybe talk us through kind of what that looks like.
A few principles here. First, when you're in the position of giving feedback, you really need to be thoughtful in how much positive versus constructive negative feedback you are going to give.
Yeah,
Everyone is a work in progress, right? So we can always highlight the things that someone did right or the things that they still need to do or that they did wrong.
right.
Uh, Highlighting successes works well for people who are unsure about their commitment, about their confidence. I don't really know if I can do this. And when you highlight what I already did, okay, or what I did right, I feel more motivated. Only to the point where someone feel like they are the experts, they know what they are doing, you are moving to more constructive feedback. Okay, so if you are trying to teach a child how to play an instrument, you are not going to be too harsh of them when they are beginners, right? Because they will just conclude that it's not for me. I don't have the talent. I don't have the stamina. I cannot do this. Only once the child has grown into as someone who can play and can master this skill, this is when you're going to say, yeah, but you didn't quite express things the right way. You didn't quite kept I don't know, the tempo or whatever,
Right, right.
and move to more negative feedback. We find that for like people themselves, it's really hard to learn from negative feedback. It really requires that you are confident enough to pay attention to the lesson, because otherwise, one of two things will happen. Either you will not pay any attention, it's as if you got no feedback, or you will conclude that this is not for you, that you are a failure because you have failed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, on this point of failure, and because we are in that, potentially that middle phase of the goal setting for the new year, talk a little bit about how you recommend people managing setbacks because we're human, life happens. This is a podcast for incredibly busy women that have a lot on their plates. They're balancing work and life and motherhood and caregiving and all the things, right? Clearly, balls are going to drop, right? So, how do we keep from internalizing that, being too hard on ourselves? Kind of what does that look like? And how do we sort of maintain that level of motivation even when, things are kind of going sideways?
So, Laura, here's the thing that never stops amazing me, even though I've been studying motivation for like 25 years now. People are very surprised when they like, experience setbacks. Okay, it's as if they did not expect that to happen. And why on earth are they so surprised? Okay, I mean, of course you will have setbacks. The most predictable thing is that you will have setbacks. You
Right.
plan to exercise every day and always eat what's good for you. You plan to never lose your temper. Of course, you will lose your temper. Like, you know it, I know it, everybody knows that. And somehow, when we experience these setbacks, for many of us, the first reaction is like, what just happened? And how can I recover from this? And maybe I should just give up on my aspiration because I have failed. Now, I say that because one of the simple strategies, this is actually a strategy that I studied when I got my PhD, that was a part of my PhD work many years ago. Just anticipate these setbacks,
Mm.
anticipate the obstacles. If you just think that this is going to be tense, okay, this meeting, this conversation is going to be hard, you are less likely to lose your temper than if you did not anticipate it in advance. If you are
Right.
going to a party and you just stop for a second to anticipate that there's going to be a lot of alcohol there, you are less likely to be drinking too much than if you did not anticipate that. So the main strategy in my mind for dealing with setbacks is just sit down and anticipate them, because you will have setbacks. And at that point, you want to know how to recover, okay, and what to do.
Yeah, it's kind of like planning, not so much planning for failure, but it's planning for setback, right? It's sort of creating, is it fair to say maybe creating like a plan two, essentially, or a backup plan or backup strategy, perhaps?
Yeah, which is a big part of it, okay, the backup plan, but also just the plan. Okay, you are not going to every day be functioning on the best, highest level. Okay, this is just not human. We found in a study with my colleague, previous student Caitlin Woolley, that people plan for their future self in a way that suggests that their future self is not really a human. Okay, this is a cold person that will only do what's good for them. Okay, and so they tend to underestimate how important it is that my future self will enjoy what they do, will feel excited in the moment, will not only be driven by what's good in the long run. And part of anticipating setbacks is also realizing that my future self is not going to always be successful.
Right. Right. Okay, so let's assume, we have failed to plan for the setback. We've had the setback. We're sitting in and wallowing in the setback and feeling really just cruddy about ourselves. What then? What's your recommendation for how we get out of the cruddy and sort of pick ourselves up by our big girl britches and keep going? What does that look like? What's maybe some
Yeah.
strategies for not wallowing in the setback.
There's a bunch of strategies. I want to mention two. Okay. The first one is to give advice to someone. Okay. It could be to
Mm,
your future self. And in research with Lauren Esquis Winkler, we found that when people post failure are encouraged to give advice, it kind of forces them to think about what they have learned. And they always find their advice more motivating than any advice that some expert will give them. Okay.
mm,
And so we looked at people that were like struggling with school, that were struggling with their finance, with their anger management, with their health. Okay. So they were trying to lose weight. And after they have failed, they were always motivated by sitting down and giving advice.
interesting.
My second suggestion would be to think about this unpleasant experience as a sign that you're developing. Okay, this is a signal that something is happening. People have this intuition when they exercise. They realize that when they sweat and like they breathe hard and their body is not fully comfortable, that's a good sign. Okay, that means that something is happening.
Right.
Okay. Emotionally, we need to learn that too. Okay. When we don't feel well emotionally, it's like sweating when you exercise. Something is happening. You are learning. You are growing.
This all makes so much sense to have, you lay it out like this and it makes perfect sense, right? But the question that I have in my mind is, how is it that we still are sort of mystified by this when it happens? Why don't we do a better job of raising our children with this in mind, sort of teaching them that this is part of that? Where is the disconnect? Why do we not? Why is this such a difficult concept for us to internalize and grasp?
Oh, that's a very philosophical question. I wonder. I think that a lot of it comes from our naive belief. By the way, also as researchers, that there is such a thing as a willpower.
Hmm.
And if you have failed, you do not have the willpower, and that's somehow diagnostic of your future possibilities. So we have this unhealthy relationship with failure that like, no, not only I have failed, but I'm also a failure. Okay, I also signal to myself that it will never work out, and this is probably something that we should just change in the conversation and
Yeah.
in the culture, and then maybe another part of why it's so hard to learn from setbacks. It's just that it always a surprise for us.
Yeah.
We always imagine everything happening exactly as we planned it. Okay, the number one fallacy in behavioral science is the planning fallacy.
Mm,
Okay, what is the planning fallacy? Is that like we don't realize that we will be behind. Okay, that we will not meet our deadlines. That things will not work out exactly on schedule. Why is that? Because when we plan things, okay, like our plan is exactly as scheduled, and we are always very strong, and the weather is always beautiful, and everybody's fully supportive, and then life happens.
right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Oh my gosh, so fascinating. Um, let's talk a little bit about rewards and incentives, which I don't think we've talked about yet, and the role that they can play in helping us really both stay on track and maybe get back on track when we have a slip.
Yes, so incentives are interesting because incentives are often used to motivate others, right? So we give incentives to our employees, to our children, to people around us to motivate them, and they also incentivize us so that there is less work on giving incentives to yourself.
Mm.
However, just as much as we can incentivize others, we can incentivize ourselves. And usually we think about this as adding this like mini goal. Okay. And so the reason that you want to exercise is because you want to be healthy. That's the big goal. Okay, but if you add some small incentive, if I like do it, and I'm going to, I don't know, get myself some nice coffee, or by the end of the week or the month, give myself some prize. You kind of added the small incentive, a small goal,
Mhm.
okay, that allows you to stick with the one that is in the long run. Of course, you should be careful because incentives are tricky. They can also backfire. Okay? Sometimes they obscure the reason that we do things. We forget about the big goal. We do it only for the incentives. So, put incentives at these like daily small things that keep you on track, but beware.
Yeah. Okay, maybe can you dig into that a little bit more in terms of how they can sort of obscure the bigger goal, maybe your bigger mission, your bigger why, or your bigger purpose for perhaps, and sort of what that looks like?
Oh, there was like so much research on how incentives go the wrong way. Let me know. One study that we ran was with children. They were children between the age 3 to 5. That was a here in Chicago with Mikhail Maimaran, and basically we told them a story about a girl that ate carrots and that made her strong or that made her smart, and that there were like external incentives. Okay, she like ate these carrots and then she could count to 100. What we found is that kids were less likely to eat carrots after this. Now they did have one carrot because they wanted to count to 100, right? But they don't want the whole bowl. It's kind of it's medicine. Okay? Lots of research on how incentives basically confuse us in my life, okay? Because I'm so used to keeping the speed limit so I don't get a fine. When I feel certain the police is not here, or I can find myself overspeeding. I kind of, in my mind, forgot that the reason to obey traffic laws is to keep myself healthy and in one piece. Okay, it's not about
Right.
the incentives. Uh, so you can see that. Just let me throw here another example. You can see that when people turn 21, they get drunk. Like, what's going on here? Well, they didn't realize that the reason that there is a law that limits consumption of alcohol among children is to protect their health.
Right. Right. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about, we haven't talked about temptation and self-control as much, which is sort of close, I think, closely related, right? But maybe let's share some perspective on how you think about temptation and self-control, because that it's not the
Yeah.
same thing as willpower necessarily. So maybe talk a little bit about the difference.
Temptations, yes. Temptations are like these things that stand in the way of more important goals. And so we all have multiple goals. Okay. We have family goals, community goals, health goals, leisure goals. We want to enjoy life. We want to get somewhere in life. And in general, we seek to pursue all these goals together. But in the process of like doing many things, some things we need to let go. Okay, so maybe in pursuit of my health, I should not eat certain things. Okay, and in pursuit of my relationship, I should not engage in certain behaviors such as leaving the kitchen a mess. Okay, so these become temptations. Okay, eating the chocolate, making a mess, these things that by themselves they are kind of fun.
Right.
Okay? Except that there is now another goal that's more important. Okay, yeah, spending and saving is a big one. Okay,
Yeah.
like I want to purchase many things. It's fun. Okay, it makes me happy, but I also have an overriding goal, which is to save for the future. What we find as a field is that the number one intervention in dealing with these temptations is basically to multiply them in your mind, okay? To think about this decision not as a one-time decision, but as many decisions.
Mm.
We sometimes call it bracketing, other times we call it wide decision frame, but basically it's never about whether you want to eat a donut. It's whether you want to eat 100 donuts. Okay. It's not about whether you want to splurge now, is whether if you had to make this decision 100 times, what the decision would be. Now,
Yes.
sometimes you want to like allow a donut or to splurge, but you don't want to allow it 100 times. So if you think that this decision is exactly like every decision that you have every day, well, that helps us better identify our priorities, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Okay, if you could leave my listener with um maybe your best advice for kind of how to tackle this particular sort of phase that we find ourselves in related to goal setting. We've talked a lot about strategies and you've given us great perspective, but maybe just some parting thoughts on things to keep in mind that relate to your work here.
So, no, because it's January, I would mention that we have followed thousands of people in pursuit of New Year's resolution. And the number one predictor of whether people will be successful is intrinsic motivation. That is whether they found something that they look forward to doing, that they're excited about doing. Okay. Now, obviously, if you set a resolution, I can tell by the fact that you set a resolution that you're not too excited to do this, okay? Because otherwise you would already be doing it.
Right.
Right? So, like, it's not that you set a resolution to eat ice cream and watch Netflix. But if you are more excited than me, okay, if you set a resolution to eat healthily and you're kind of excited about exploring all this healthy cooking and these new things that you did not eat or cooked before, you have a better chance than if I set a resolution of like not eat everything that I like and I just dread it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, intrinsic motivation is really the one main predictor of adherence to resolutions. And then, as just a very general strategy, I'll go back to where I started. You need to find the easy way rather than trying harder. Okay, you need to change the situation. You need to change what's around you, how you think about it, who is around you. You have to make it easy because you're not going to be a different person. And you cannot really work much harder. And so find the easy way.
Yeah, ultimately removing those obstacles. Okay, so Eyelet, I'm curious, given that you are the expert on goal setting and motivation, did you set New Year's resolutions for yourself? It's a personal question, but
Yeah, I did, and it's already like the end of January, and I have not made much progress.
so are you as the expert, do you find yourself do you beat yourself up because you know the rules, you know what it's going to take? Like how do you deal with that when your own goals are a little harder to reach?
Yeah, well, so my resolution was I wanted to be more of like to enjoy art more. I want
Ah,
to go to the theater more. I want to go to concerts. I feel like I live my life and not finding enough space for this. So
mm,
this is my resolution. And now you need to organize these things in advance. Really,
right.
that's my issue. That you need to just sit down and do the homework and identify the things that you want to do this year and do a schedule. And I now made a public commitment to you and your listeners that I'm going to do this. And I think that this is a pretty good strategy. I will be doing it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, this has been delightful. I've loved our conversation. Ayelet Fishbach, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Laura, so much for having me. And I hope that everybody is successful with at least some of their goals for the new year.
Absolutely. Absolutely.